So excited to have Dr. Kelsey Dexter on the podcast today. I've been waiting a long time to interview you and watching what you put out on Instagram and very fascinated by what you teach because I will say I'm sure there's other endocrinologists around who might teach some circadian health and a little bit of quantum health, but I don't know of any. So you're the first one that I'm really excited to interview because you are teaching these newer they're not new. They're very foundational. They're ancient, but new to a lot of people and so different from what we've been exposed to and told and taught. So welcome to the podcast. We are delighted to have you here today to learn with you.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's my pleasure. Very, very excited to be here. And, I don't know any other endocrinologists who teach this either. So if there are any that hear this, let's connect. Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's a really, really important facet of hormonal health in general that I'm excited to spread the word about. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I would think you being an endocrinologist, you would know, you know, a pretty big network out there. So yes. And I think, the tides are turning. People want to learn and things aren't working for a lot of people. We're implementing a lot of nutrition and exercise principles and people are still stuck. It's like, well, and that was me even, I'm like, I had my nutrition dialed in for decades and I was always really active and I still was having health issues. So let's dive into all of this and first give us a little bit about your background. I'm assuming you're a traditionally trained endocrinologist. How in the world did you get to where you are now and teaching the things that you teach?
Yeah. I think it's a kind of cool story. And I like to say I just sort of follow golden threads as I find them in many different aspects of my life, right? But I was pretty sure I wanted to be a physician from the time I was tiny. And I worked toward that, my entire childhood, high school, college. And so I was really, really interested in skin. And I've always had this sort of preoccupation with skin health and sun exposure. And I actually was a very, very vocally taught friends, family, patients to avoid the sun for a very long time. But I went to medical school thinking I was going to be a dermatologist. And when I started sort of surveying the landscape of health in the United States and seeing where the need was, metabolism was really the area that I knew where I could make the biggest impact as a practitioner. So in the realm of endocrinology, which is, the study of hormones, the science of hormones, basically, metabolism is my main interest. And I trained at the University of Colorado, and they have a huge obesity research center there. And I had really, really great mentors. So yes, I was traditionally trained in centralized Western allopathic medicine. So when I got to practice, I kept seeing patients who would tell me, I'm tired, I can't lose weight. How are you doing today? I'm tired, I can't lose weight. It's every single person. And I was really dialed in on diet and coaching patients, to keep blood sugar stable and to regulate insulin production and improve insulin sensitivity. And I could see these patients working so hard and then still not hitting these benchmarks and it didn't make sense to me. And then in the meantime, I had a lot of things going on in my life, a lot of stressful things. And I started having some very strange nervous system symptoms, like numbness and flushing in my foot and pain in my facial nerve. And there were a couple of physicians I saw that thought that I probably had multiple sclerosis. And I did not want that diagnosis. I was not going to identify with that diagnosis. And I told them I didn't want any more testing, that I was going to fix this. So I started doing a deep dive into autoimmune disease, specifically multiple sclerosis prevalence data, like looking at the incidence according to latitude, which is really, really interesting. People at the equator have very, very low incidence of this condition. And then the further away you move from the sunshine, the more people are impacted. So I got really interested in intentional sun exposure and vitamin D deficiency about 4 years ago. And I started my own journey in desensitizing myself to UV light because I thought my entire life that I was sun sensitive because every time I stepped outside in high UV index, I would burn. But there were so many factors at play that caused that. And so I learned how to develop a solar callus, which it's a really important part of safe sun exposure. But humans are designed to be outside all the time. We evolved under the light, under full spectrum sunlight, and the intensity of the sun varies over the course of the year. So if we are outside in the times when the sun is not as intense, in the spring, in the early morning hours, it helps us develop our own protection. And it's not only just protection. I believe that solar callus and melanin is an avenue for us to harvest sunlight. It's our body's way to actually use it, right? So, and let's see, I have not worn sunblock. Okay, there are caveats with this because I am smart about sun exposure, avoid overexposure, and know my limits and seek shade when needed, right? But I have not worn any sunblock or sunscreen in 4 years, and I've not had a sunburn in that time frame. So I think it's pretty amazing how adaptive our bodies are. And, you know, there are so many patients that don't understand how our bodies are designed to harness energy. We think, and we're taught that we get our energy from our food, but we really should be getting the majority of our energy from our environment. And when you stay inside most of the time, and you also insulate your body from the negative charge of the earth, you are missing these two huge inputs of energy. And then when you eat a carb-centric diet and you're using glucose as your primary mitochondrial fuel source, you can't harvest as many electrons from glucose as you can from ketones, which are made from fat. So you are literally in the lowest energy state that your body can operate within in that scenario. And I think this is a really important thing for especially patients who are battling weight loss resistance and insulin resistance to understand. The efficiency of our body matters when it comes to metabolism, and these external signals dictate all kinds of things, all kinds of processes that influence metabolism. So yeah, in the process of getting more sunshine, learning about grounding, learning about harnessing energy from the environment, I started healing pretty rapidly. And that was enough to convince me that this story was very important. And then I found Dr. Jack Cruz, kind of similar to Dr. Alexis Cowan. We both had this wake up moment where all the pieces clicked and I could see the whole picture of, you know, the health of the nation and how light is impacting this. And now that's all I can talk about.
I know. It's like one of those things when you learn it, you can't unlearn. And I felt that way about food for so long. Like, oh my gosh, there's so much processed food. There's these food dyes. There's all of this, you know, stuff put into our food system. And that's why everybody is so sick. And I still like that. That's still a big focus of mine. But once you learn about the circadian and the light stuff, you're like, oh my gosh, there was a huge missing piece that I was missing as a practitioner. And, you know, the vast majority of my students weren't implementing because they didn't know any better, but so many things to go back to with your own personal story with the nervous system. Like that's how I really like, I was always somebody who loved the sun. I live in Wisconsin, so I'm a northern latitude, but I would always get a little bit of a sunburn in the spring, always, you know, because it's been 6 months since I really had any skin exposure. And this is the first year, like you talked about building the solar callus, and maybe we'll come back to that in a few minutes. But this is the first year I have not burned at all, even a little bit, from the time, you know, our snow melted up until now. And I've spent a lot of time out in the sun. And like you said, I do it smartly. But I haven't even like gotten pink this year. So it's really amazing how the different sunlight, the different frequencies really just prime you for what's coming later in the day. And I think that's what I was always missing. Like I'd be like, oh, it's sunny, I want to go outside, but I'd wait till like after lunch or,
Mhm.
I'd maybe take a walk in the morning, but I was always wearing sunglasses. So that is new this year. Like this is the first year I haven't worn sunglasses too. And it was really tough for me because like you, I had some nervous system dysregulation, I had adrenal fatigue, cortisol issues. So that the sunglasses, the bright lights, I think that was part of it. Like I couldn't deal with that, so I always was
Mhm.
wearing sunglasses even when it was shady, and the sun wasn't even out, especially when I was driving. And so I haven't worn sunglasses in months. Like even I'll go to the beach and I'll take a hat, if I'm on the water maybe. But my husband too, like he's like, I've always had like darker skin that will tan easily after a little bit of sun exposure, but his family has been was very fair, Swedish, from the high latitudes. And this is the first year, like he thinks I'm kind of bonkers with a lot of things that I implement and teach. But I'm like, just go outside a little bit in the morning while you're having meetings, take your shirt off if you're not on camera, and just walk around on the earth. And he, like, my daughter's like, oh my gosh, dad, this is the tannest I've ever seen you. And he hasn't burned either. And he always burns. So it is amazing how if we like know these things and intuitively can implement some of them, like the ramifications that we can see. And yeah, I mean, it's really simple stuff too. That's what excites
Mhm.
me is I feel like nutrition can get really complicated and people want to count things and they want protocols and they want like carb limits, they want protein limits, they want all of these things, but we're more like just learning about your light environment is exciting because it's simple, everyone can do it. And once you learn, it may, like you said, there's like this clicking moment that everything just makes sense. And I'd like to come back a little bit more and talk more about like the different latitudes and that sort of thing too before we close out here. But what are you seeing? Well, first of all, I want to ask you, so you're the only endocrinologist teaches, like, you teach about blood sugar regulation and
Mhm.
nutrition and all of the basic things, but
Mhm.
you're also implementing the light and the circadian rhythm. Are people just like finding you by mistake, like stumbling, like, oh my gosh, I get this great endocrinologist? Are people like seeking you out? Because you have your own, you are in Jackson, Tennessee, and you see patients. So you're not really online a whole lot. Your practice is where you are. So
Mhm.
what's happening with that? I'm just curious. Like, are people starting to come out of the woodwork and want to work with you? Or
Yeah, so I am the only full-time endocrinologist in this area,
oh
and
wow,
I have a very, very busy, sort of standard practice, and I've been seeing people here for about 7 years now. This is how long I've been in Jackson, Tennessee, and have been following the same patients, and they've kind of seen this, they've gone through this evolution,
okay,
this knowledge gathering process with me because I do a lot of coaching in
yeah,
my visits. So my general philosophy when we're managing diabetes is we use the least amount of medicine possible,
okay,
right? And I think I view myself as a patient advocate, a team member. I'm not dictating anything to patients about how their care is going to be, but I like to give options. And I can say, based on some testing, like if I know that a patient is making plenty of insulin and I know what their diet is and I know what their lifestyle is like, I can pretty much predict whether or not that person could get off of pharmaceuticals if they were doing certain things, making certain
yeah,
changes. And I like to give everybody that knowledge and that option. And there are many, many patients that I work with that also want to do the best they can from a behavior standpoint, which is really, really it's validating for me and it makes my job great. Right. I like working with people who really want to be healthy and they want to claim their own health. So I have not taken new patients at my practice, my physical practice in about 2 years because I am booked out so far with everyone that I already see. But I think, yeah, people do find me,
Ah,
and I get lots of requests for help, and so I'm trying to build a new type of platform,
yeah.
um, vitalist centered, decentralized, and accessible to people who really want to dive into this and improve their health. And I have some connections in Nashville, so people that are working with me to build this. So it's coming down the road. And I'm really excited about that potential because I have found some other practitioners who are very aligned in this way. And yeah, I think we're going to build something great together.
Ah, how refreshing. I mean, to walk into an endocrinologist and be like, we want to get you off medications.
Yeah.
If at all possible. And it's just in the training. I was traditionally trained too. It's what you're trained in. And I just kind of stumbled across all of this kind of by accident as well. And I'm like you, I'm like, I could just keep teaching what I was teaching about nutrition and all the foundational things, but it's such a huge component, and I saw it change my own life within a matter of months.
Mhm.
Something I was struggling with for probably 20 years and I could not resolve with nutrition and stress management, like my own cortisol issues that you do. You just want to like teach everybody about everything. But I have found like my audience, not that they've been resistant, but I think they're just kind of like, whoa, like what, what is this? Like they need a little bit of a transition time almost. And then I feel like on social, like once you start talking about the sunlight, and not wearing sunscreen because I'm like you, like I've had the same sunblock, although that's zinc based, and like, I swear it's been in there for years. Like I just don't use it, and I haven't been in a place where I couldn't just like go to the shade or put a shirt on or whatever if I do need, if I feel like my sun exposure has been too much. But yeah, it's just something that you want everybody to know about, and you think that everybody does know about, but they don't. Like you
Yeah.
said, so many people are just so afraid to go out at all, like to expose their skin, to not wear sunglasses. Most people are putting on sunblock before they even go out. So we know that you treat type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, all the metabolic diseases. Yeah, metabolic health is a huge problem for the vast majority of Americans. We know that you treat them very differently. So say somebody was well, you're not taking new patients, but if you met somebody like, I don't like to really coach my family members, but say like somebody was new coming to you for prediabetes, like what are the main things you're talking through with them? And I know that this is not ever just one visit. This is like when I'm teaching people, I have 37 lessons I have them go through and
Mhm.
learn all of these things because it is a lot and it's so far removed and so different from what they're being exposed to. But what are the basics that, if somebody new is coming in that you're teaching them?
Um, it's pretty broad overall, right? Because there are so many factors that influence this. But I really believe that circadian disruption is causing more metabolic disease than any other independent factor. Because we've drastically changed our light environment over the last 15 years, taking red and infrared out of our indoor lighting, which that stimulates our mitochondria to make ATP and lowers blood glucose, right? And we replace that with blue light, and we are exposed to blue light at times when our body should not be. And that's one of the maximum suppressors of melatonin secretion, which helps control our circadian rhythm. Leptin, a hormone that should signal the body's energy stores, right, gets misdirected, gets confused whenever the circadian rhythm is not regulated. So when the body can't see adipose stores and thinks that you are in a low energy state, it totally changes the way your body uses energy. So I think that learning about the circadian piece is fundamental. I used to start with food. Now I start with circadian health because I've seen that even when patients do the very best they can with their diet, it still is not enough unless they have the circadian piece dialed in. And, I work with a lot of shift workers who have a totally backward
Yes.
sleep schedule. And those people in general are really sick.
Yep.
And I don't know, there are ways, and there are ways that we can help preserve some of these Zeitgeber timekeeper functions to do better, but I don't know that there's any way to be optimally healthy and vital if you're not sleeping when it's dark outside.
I agree.
So we go through that and come up with strategies to get morning light, block blue light after dark, mitigate excessive blue light during the day if they work on screens all day, etc. We talk a lot about sleep and optimizing sleep. And from a dietary standpoint, I try my best to talk patients out of processed food to start. I'm not really dogmatic about macros or counting carbs or anything like that initially, because sometimes when your body gets the rest it needs, you dial in your hormonal secretion, everything comes into symphony from a circadian standpoint. Bodies can tolerate more carbohydrate than they otherwise could, right? So I never know how much we need to push on carb restriction or how we need to like stack macros and meals until we do these other things first. But I don't think processed food is good for anybody. And so if we are eating optimally to nourish our bodies, we focus on whole foods and try to center our meals around protein. I think it's really important for bodies to have digestive rest so that we can use stored energy, dip into our glycogen stores, and then eventually our adipose stores and stay in energy balance in that way. And whenever there's a lot of snacking or whenever patients eat right up until bedtime and they don't have at least a 12-hour window of digestive rest overnight, they never really get through the glycogen stores in their liver. So you've probably talked about this before, but I think it's worth repeating. You know, our primary backup energy store in the body is glycogen, our immediate backup energy store. So when the blood sugar dips and the body makes glucagon, we mobilize glucose from the liver. And on average, you know, there's probably, I think, 80 grams of glucose on average that the liver can store, which translates, depending on the person and their metabolic rate, you know, to a time window of 10 to 16-ish hours of backup glucose. So if you never use the glycogen, you can't use your stored adipose. So bodies keep fat stores for times of restriction and starvation to keep us alive. And our bodies don't like to burn fat. So we have to create the scenario. If we have extra adipose tissue we're trying to lose, we have to create the scenario that allows our body to want to use it. And it can be very individual as to what it takes to get that to happen and to let the body come into optimal energy balance.
Yeah, definitely. I think, there's just a lot of things that come into play with that. And I know there's a lot of, this podcast used to be called Fast to Heal, and we would mostly focus on intermittent fasting strategies and some carb restriction. And so, we've talked a lot about like how to burn through those glycogen stores and all of that. But now we're focusing more on the right types of fasting and right length of time for fasting and not overdoing it, especially for women, and circadian fasting. And it's just been in the last probably 3 months or so that I've been eating much earlier. I was always a breakfast person up until the intermittent fasting, and there is a lot of merit to that, but I just like fasting all through breakfast for so many years and until 10, 11, 12, sometimes later, that dysregulation that was a problem for my cortisol, and I was wearing sunglasses in the morning, even though I was outside a fair amount. And then I would go outside in the winter, but not nearly as much as I did this past winter, knowing what I knew. So there it is. It's very touchy, but I love how you start with the circadian stuff because it's so foundational. And I was missing that too, because I wasn't understanding that like cortisol is above insulin as far as the hormonal cascade. And so I was just really, really focused on insulin resistance, which is very important for people's metabolic health in this day and age. but I wasn't understanding that it's going to be really, really challenging to regulate blood sugar, regulate insulin resistance if you don't have the cortisol, melatonin, and that whole pattern balanced out first. So I kind of did things backward, but
So did I. um, Definitely. I have my own story about like extreme cortisol dysregulation related
yeah,
to
tell us
fasting.
about it. Tell us about because a lot of my listeners have cortisol.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was really interested in fasting for autophagy and inflammation reduction when I had this nervous system issue going on. And I started leaning into that really intensely. And I was doing one meal a day for 6 months, at like 2 p.m. in the afternoon, eating a huge lunch, and that was it. Also, waking up in the morning, not getting morning sun, doing a HIIT workout, and having about 4 shots of espresso a day.
Oh, and all the things regulated.
And I got my A1C, okay? And I've always been like relatively lean and fit. And I got my A1C and it was 5.8. And I was like, excuse me?
Yeah, that's
You know?
22 hours a day.
I was like, what is happening? And then I've never had any mood issues in my entire life. I started waking up every morning, 3 a.m., having a panic attack.
Oh, I
And
was waking up, but I wasn't having a panic attack.
yeah, I was like, what is happening? What is happening? And then I should have known sooner, right? Because I know hormones and I know this is when cortisol peaks. I should have known, but I was so focused on meeting these benchmarks with my diet and behavior that the rigidity hurt me, right?
Yeah.
I wasn't having a period anymore. Like my gut got completely messed up. I always had great digestion, but then, when you're not giving your body regular inputs, plus you're not sending a circadian signal and eating at the right time of day, digestion just gets crazy. And there was a time, so it got so bad without getting into details that it looked on imaging like I had they said space occupying lesion in the colon. Like for one day, I thought I had cancer when we started evaluating this because my gut had gone completely flaccid. My colon was like flaccid, pressed a certain point because there was no activity. I wasn't putting food through enough to actually get those motor neurons to squeeze. It was crazy. So I've had some pretty significant functional pathology related to fasting and cortisol dysregulation. And so this is one of the reasons that I really like to think about cortisol, which is such a circadian hormone, right? Before we start working on fasting. I think that for an individual who is in sympathetic overdrive, whose cortisol is dysregulated, fasting is not the thing to do. Like we are eating protein, showing our body safety signals, getting our light environment right, and getting that cortisol under control. And then when your body is otherwise supported in that way, if you want to try fasting for specific goals, it's appropriate, right? And there are safer ways to do that and for reproductive age females, menstruating females, we have to be a little bit more specific about what body needs at different times of the cycle, in addition to keeping our circadian health in mind whenever we're fasting. So these days, I'm a big proponent of breakfast, 30 grams of protein within an hour of rising, ideally, and very low carb for people who are working on metabolic health. And personally, if I am going to fast, I like to skip dinner because it gives us that longer window overnight to use glycogen stores. And we go into the night sort of in a lower insulin state, which is really helpful for cellular cleanup, autophagy, et cetera. So
I think that's so important for females to hear. They've heard it from me recently. And my story on how I found my cortisol was so dysregulated. And I wasn't doing one meal a day hardly ever, but I was doing an 18-hour fast most days. And like I said, it was most like I started to switch to eating at like 10 or 11, but even that was too late and it helped, but it didn't bring my cortisol back into balance. So there are lots of females here who are, I don't even want to say chronic intermittent fasters, but they've pushed the intermittent fasting paradigm. And I mean, I was teaching all different types of methods, and I was teaching the circadian method, but I wasn't paying attention to the cortisol dysregulation as closely as I should until it happened to me. And I started to have the same things as you, as like my nervous system, like, and I just, like, my mom died, my dad, like, I had all of these family issues that just pushed me over the top, right? Like, they were there were some subtle things, but I've always had a lot of bloating with my digestive. So I know that this has been going on for many, many years. My eye was twitching all the time. Like, my left eye would just twitch. Like, whenever I get stressed, it like twitch, twitch, twitch. I'm like, that has stopped, which is kind of miraculous, because I'm like, is this ever? And I never even connected it to a nervous system, dysregulation, and just so many things have come back into balance. And it's, like I said, it's only been like 3 or 4 months that I've been working on this, but you think you're going about everything, you're trying to fix your your insulin levels, you're trying to fix your blood sugar, and you're doing these intermittent fasting protocols, but too many people just take it to the extreme. Thankfully, I was never a coffee drinker. I hate coffee, so I never had the caffeine going in the morning. Or I think, things would have gotten even, escalated more quickly than they did. But I'd love to hear your story. And it's like we're both really educated medical people. and we thought we were it's just important to hear again, like, we were missing things. We're always learning. There's always, like, if you're not healing, there's always something that you can do or try, or it's just another layer to be figured out. But this is a huge one. The light and the lighting is definitely a huge one. So I was going to ask you about intermittent fasting. So I've kind of taken the same approach. So many of my followers have cortisol issues. So we are just really going back to eating breakfast and eating earlier. And like you said, when that nervous system calms down, to try fasting through dinner, if it feels comfortable for you. I mean, sometimes I'm just not even hungry for dinner anymore, because I've eaten enough throughout the day, and we're really paying attention to menstrual cycles and timing it so that we're not doing long fasting or too much fasting at certain times during the menstrual cycle. So that's very, very important. So can you explain a little bit more about, like, how light and natural sunlight is affecting your actual blood sugar? Like, if somebody, like, I've been coaching my students too, like, if you're even just to open a window while they're eating, if they can't eat outside. I mean, I have the luxury of eating outside right now in July, but when it comes January and it's below 0 here, I think even I'm not going to bundle up and eat outside. But talk about how that helps to regulate blood sugar. Because I've touched on it, but we haven't really looked at, like, mechanisms or what's actually happening.
Yeah. So the most important factor in the light environment when it comes to regulating glucose, I would say, especially when we eat inside now, is the absence of infrared light and red light in our visible spectrum. Because there are scientists that are doing some beautiful research right now that show that you can shine red light on the skin, and the blood sugar will drop on average like 27% is one study showed.
Like, it's not like 2%.
No. It's a quarter, it's an amazing decrease just from that light exposure, right? So we get infrared and red light from the sun all the time. So when you can't get it in an inside environment, all you have to do is eat outside to send your body the signal. And what's happening is red and infrared light speed up glucose uptake in the mitochondria. And so it's using that glucose to make more ATP, so more energy output, and that has an impact on glucose uptake. Yeah. So counter to that, when you eat under blue light, you stimulate cortisol, which raises glucose. you stimulate production of this insulin secretagogue, meaning a peptide hormone that makes your body make more insulin, right, called CLIP. And if the environment is absent of the red and infrared light, this has a tendency to really raise blood sugar and raise insulin, which has an implication for insulin resistance and weight gain over time. So these mechanisms are pretty well elucidated, right? We know that red and infrared, lower blood sugar, blue light raises blood sugar, and full spectrum sunlight has both, but the body uses natural sunlight differently than it does wavelengths in isolation, right? So I really, really try to eat all my meals outside if at all possible. And you can imagine, based on what I've told you so far, that I do a lot of N-of-1 experiments. And I have access to, glucose monitor samples, and I check a lot of ketones. I do all kinds of personal metric testing. And whenever I was doing everything possible from a diet, exercise, and fasting standpoint, but working under blue light all day and not blocking excessive blue light, my average blood glucose was about 105. And whenever I started getting sunlight in the mornings and blocking excessive blue light and blocking blue light at night consistently, my average glucose dropped to 75.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
Crazy. The nutrition wasn't really changed.
right.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Right.
amazing.
Yeah. So that's just me, but the literature is teaching us about why this is happening. And when I think about all the children that we now see who have type 2 diabetes, which when I was a kid, before LED lights came out, before we had personal screens, that was not even a diagnosis that was recognized. That's why we said that people had juvenile diabetes and adult diabetes, which is how we differentiated the two, which says nothing about mechanism of or pathology, like what causes the issue. But now we see lots of kids with insulin resistance. And kids are in an anabolic or growth state. So insulin signaling in kids is important for growth, and children can tolerate a lot more carbohydrate intake than someone who's reached adult size and metabolism, because they are always growing.
Yes.
They have a place to put that energy. And so it's really unusual to see kids who are profoundly insulin resistant or have type 2 diabetes. And I don't think that it's a food story. I think that it's a light story. Even in schools, kids are bathed in blue light all day long. They barely get to go outside. They have them on tablets in the school directly into their most sensitive visual photoreceptors, right? And that is sending signals that dictate these hormonal pathways that contribute to weight gain and insulin resistance. It is very important for kids to stay off of tablets as much as possible. We know that tablet use causes myopia in kids. It causes like visual disturbance, and there are associations, long-term use, with macular degeneration. And I just think about what implications this is going to have for these kids who grew up in the age where it's normal to have screens in our face all the time, right? I'm really, really excited about companies like the Daylight Computer, who are coming out with new technology that eliminates blue light from screens. This is the way the future is moving, right? Because I don't know that we're ever going to be able to ignore our technology and the way that these devices connect us all. And so we have to figure out ways that we can live safely with our technology and mitigate the risk associated. In general, that means spending more time outside than inside and doing the best you can with your indoor light environment. There is an optics engineer named Scott Zimmerman who's made an LED light bulb that is full spectrum and emits near infrared light. It's called the NIRA. So that's a beautiful option for lighting homes during the day. And many, many companies that are working to do better with our lighting. If you can find incandescent bulbs, it's just so sad that they've been restricted, outlawed. because it's a really healthy, relatively healthy spectrum of light that those emit. You can still find 40-watt decorative incandescent bulbs, which is another type that I use around the house. But anyway, I'm really encouraged by this network of people that is paying attention to this
Yes.
light story and trying to figure out how we can impact public health in
Yes.
this way.
And I feel like the more moms know about,
Mhm.
so they're gonna, moms change everything. So I was a substitute teacher in our school district for about 5 years, and it's like the behavior is just crazy. And it was just one little school district here in central Wisconsin. My eyes were definitely open though. But I agree. When I was growing up, we had one boy I can remember with type 1 diabetes, and that was you didn't see. And like they're just restricting recess more and more. And I know for my children, once they got to middle school, you basically didn't go outside anymore at all day. Yeah, you're under fluorescent lighting. And my daughter is and will be in her senior year. She's studying special education, and she's like, Mom, and she's like a day camp counselor for special needs. She's like, the days that we're trapped where they don't go on field trips and go outside and do whatever they're doing around the community, they're trapped in a basement with fluorescent lighting.
Oh,
Like you would think, people just think it's because we're trapped in this room, but it's the light. And she comes home with headache. She knows all of this from me talking about it so much, but she's like, the fluorescent lighting gives her headaches. I'm like, well, take my day. Like I have the yellow toned glasses like you do. Take my daytime glasses when no, I can't. I'm like, you'll get to that point where it doesn't matter anymore that you're wearing some yellow tone glasses, because I just started wearing mine. Like I don't go to the gym early that much anymore. I just go like a couple times a week. And if it's before the sun rises, I have my yellow tone glasses. And at first I was like, but I just don't care anymore. I'm like, I want to feel good, and I don't want a headache. So yeah, there's just so many things. But they're all fixable. I think that's the exciting thing. Like you talked about the daylight computer. I'm interviewing the founder or one of the founders of that computer here, but that's really, really exciting. And like you said, I don't think we can get away with from technology. We're just not going to. I mean, you go to schools, that's all everything's online. I mean, they turn assignments, they learn but if we can just change the blue light and the spectrum of lighting, that's just so important. So I think it's like things are coming. It's just like people didn't know. They didn't know anybody. You can't do better without knowing better. So just people like you talking about it, and like I said, moms hear these and they're like, oh, I need to we need to make some changes at school. And they're simple changes that can be made for sure. And opening windows in your class. My daughter's like, when I have my own classroom, I'm going to have, the full spectrum light bulbs. We're not going to turn the overhead lights on. And if I can open windows, just those little changes make such a difference. So
I'm not trying also to pass any judgment on moms, right? Because look, I've got a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they are obsessed with the Nintendo. Obsessed.
Yeah.
And I navigate this very delicately all the time. But for my kids, we have certain rules around screen time, and that they always come outside with me every morning to get morning light. We do that as a family. And if they are on their screens, they wear yellow glasses, and they do this without asking, and they play outside. They can only look at their Nintendo if they're outside on the porch. And we spend more time outside than we do inside every day. Yes. So that's about the best I can do without, I understand that all their friends, they get to do these things. And I don't want to create these hard rules that they don't understand. So I'm trying to teach them how to use technology in the safest ways, and have boundaries around that.
Yeah. But and other families are going to catch on. We're just kind of like the first of that. And I went through that with food too. It's like, well, they're eating this and we don't have I'm like, I don't care. That's not coming in to my house. And when they were away, of course, it was out of my control. But yeah, I have teenage boys who are obsessed with the Xbox. I'm like, I don't understand this obsession, but they're obsessed in that it's socially how they connect with their friends. And same thing. I'm like, well, you got to go outside first. I mean, my older son's 19 and I still am like, you got to shut that off. He's like, I'm like, well, you're in my house until you go back to college. So these are the things. And he has like an outside, both my sons have outside jobs. Okay. At least they're
Good.
working, they're working outside. They're not trapped inside all the time. But I know it's just, there's so many things that you do feel are out of your control, but we can mitigate some things, as much as we can mitigate without being, like you said, there's such a fine line with being like crazy mom and being like and it's hard for kids to understand. Like my daughter's 21, she gets it, but it's when they're younger, it's hard. But the more you can instill it, the more they're just going to follow through with it. Well, let's talk a little bit about grounding before we close out. How are you using that with your practice, and what are you seeing with grounding? Just touching the earth, being outside, touching a tree, sitting in the grass. What are you seeing with that? With like helping with blood sugar and disease reversal and metabolic health?
Yeah, so that's a non-negotiable practice for me every day. And it was definitely a major part of my own healing journey. But there's so much research that shows that grounding has amazing implications for health in general, especially when it comes to lowering inflammation, right? I see a lot of patients who have had uncontrolled diabetes for years, who have neuropathy. And, every doctor tells patients with diabetes, don't ever go outside without shoes because they're worried about injury that they can't feel, right? So this is the way I was trained. And then I think about how crazy this is because, first of all, people who have diabetes all have mitochondrial dysfunction. Our mitochondria need these electrons from the earth for optimal function. And then we know that grounding decreases inflammation. And I have seen people with neuropathy get so much better from grounding practices. So that's where I think it's important for everybody, but in the disease pathology that I see, that's probably been the biggest impact overall. But if you look at metabolism and metabolic dysfunction as dictated by disrupted circadian health and then like mitochondrial dysfunction, like that puts grounding in a very important place for correcting many, many body issues. But I try to talk every patient into getting morning light. We talk about, sunrise with bare eyes and ground at the same time so that every person gets some of those electrons from the earth at least once a day. And then the more touch points we have connecting us to nature during the day, the better our physiology comes in line. So taking regular breaks with shoes off outside, letting your eyes see natural sunlight so that your brain knows what time of day it is and you're getting that energy from the earth. Very important. Yeah, I have a reputation for this because whenever I work at the office, which we have, it's surrounded by this big parking lot. So there's only one little bit of grass that I can get to. And I eat my lunch sitting in the grass right by the door where all of the other providers come in and out of the building.
Of course.
And just sweat out there in the sun, on purpose. I'm like getting vitamin D, I'm getting electrons, I'm resetting my light environment with my glasses off and everything. And so I get to do a lot of teaching just at lunch when people walk by me and they're like, what are you doing sitting in the grass? But it's really, really powerful. Much more so than people realize. Humans were made to walk on the earth under the light of the full spectrum sun. This is how we evolved. And there is this energetic exchange from above and below that happens that has a huge impact on our physiology. And it seems so simple that sometimes the buy-in is difficult for me when I'm trying to explain this to patients about how impactful it can be. But we've been, as a society, living years now, cut off from these two energetic sources. And we have to get back to this connection if we are going to be healthy as a society. We do.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's not even like we've just been cut off. Like we've been told to like block it. Like like the sun is just this evil. And I've just never bought into it. I just, how can the sun be like, it feels so good when I'm in it. I don't understand
Mhm.
how it can be, this terrible source of cancer producing. It just, but yeah, I'm sitting out on the concrete right now. So it's my grassy area is a little bit sunny and it is like 85. Even though like in Wisconsin, it does get hot, really hot in the summer. But I'm like, I'm sitting in the shade. I'm comfortable. I have my feet on the concrete. So you can ground in concrete, gravel,
Mhm.
grass, stone, water, like
Mhm.
water.
Sand, wet sand.
Yeah, wet sand.
Um,
Great.
yeah, that's the best conductor, I think. That's my favorite conductor.
I know. And I've always loved going to the beach.
Electrons.
Like my daughter's like, she knows how much stress I've been under. If you could do anything, I'm like, I would just go to the beach and take my book,
Mhm.
sit there and read and just decompress. And I see you wear an Aura ring. So I track, I put it on airplane mode during the day, but
Mhm.
um whenever I have the opportunity to go, like I work outside whenever I can. I work from home. So I just, if it's hot, I just work on, I have a little portable desk and a chair and I sit under the shade. But whenever like I've been grounding for a while, it always takes me into the restorative zone. Like even
Mhm.
if I'm working on something that's really like high, like needs high brain power, it puts me into restorative mode almost every time. And in my office, there's Wi-Fi, there's all, I stay out of there as much as I can. But there are, and I know like not everybody has that luxury, but like you said, you can go outside for light breaks during the day, like take your
Mhm.
glasses off, go sit in the grass for your lunch, just little things. So are there any other practical, as we close out, like any other practical tips? We already talked about morning sunlight with naked eyes. You have yellow tone glasses on right
Mhm.
now in the daytime because we're on, we're recording this on Zoom on computers. So you can't always get away from it. So mitigating that during the day, orange or red tones at night, taking light breaks, grounding. Are there any other practical tips that you like to teach? And we talked about eating earlier. Practical tips that you talk about, like I've talked about too, just rolling down your window if you're taking your
Mhm.
kid to school, opening your window while you're eating. And you talked about light bulbs, like switching those out can be very, very helpful to a little bit less harsh blue light. But yeah, my glasses are on after sunset too, and I sleep great.
Yeah, I really like the phone settings where you can switch, like, I don't know, I can show you. Do you have this where you can change your screen
On my
red?
screen, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's an important thing to work on. And also remember that melatonin is suppressed by blue light and it's also suppressed by bright light, right? So the lux or the
Yeah.
brightness of the light, and then the temperature of the light matters. So sometimes we can do better just by turning the brightness down
Sure.
dramatically, which a lot of people, even during the day, when
Sure.
you're working on a screen, if you can work with a screen that's not so bright, helpful too. A
Well,
lot of people who work on computers work for companies that won't let them do anything with the software of the computer, right? And it's true for me
no.
also. And not everybody likes to wear glasses all day. I really don't mind it, and I can't function without these in my office at
Yeah.
this point because I'm so
Oh,
sensitive to
I'm
blue
getting
light.
it.
But you can buy films to stick over the front of your computer too
Okay.
that can mitigate light coming from the device. And then if it's your own device, you can get software like Iris or
Yep.
Flux.
Yep.
Um, and I have that on this computer too, so I really don't even need these glasses. It's like double protection.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I think and getting outside as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that's key too. And I think, like somebody who's optimized all of that and still looking like, okay, I really am like, now I'm like to longevity. And I'm just like, I really just want to treat my body as nicely as possible. I am starting to focus a little bit more on, I think it's a great starting point for nutrition. Like just get the processed foods out of your diet as
Mhm.
much as possible and not eating after dinner. Like those are my like first start things I
Mhm.
no snacking, just eat meals. Don't eat after dinner. Give yourself a good 3-4 hours before you go to bed so that you sleep better. But now, like, if you do want to take it one step further, just eating local, organic, and knowing that, we're just starting to talk about a little bit on the podcast, like the sunlight in your food should match
Mhm.
sunlight in your environment. And it makes sense. Like at first I was like, what? Like, but it does. It makes sense. And I see it in myself in the summer. Like I'm eating way more berries and carbohydrates that are local. I get a share every week that I typically eat. And it's not like caused weight gain or, these huge blood sugar spikes. But I would be very careful not to implement those things in the winter, being in
Mhm.
Wisconsin, have months without UV light. So I think that's kind of like the last thing with nutrition. And
Mhm.
because this can be overwhelming when you're you're first learning all these things.
Yeah. So there's a spectrum, right? Of we go from standard American diet to optimal human nutrition, and constantly working to improve is the goal. And you don't have to be perfect from the start.
Yes.
So I think when you have attainable goals that you can be consistent with, that's the most important thing when you're trying to rework your diet. So I like to keep things really simple initially. And the people who are ready to move forward, yes, we move to local, seasonal, and protein focused.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I
Uh-huh.
agree. I'd agree. It is it's a little bit overwhelming to do all of that, all of that at once. But like you said, like I like how you like first the circadian stuff and then, get that mastered, feel better, get your energy and your blood sugar all, more optimal. And then we can fine tune after that because
Mhm.
it'd be a lot. Well, I know that you're on Instagram. Is there anywhere else? Unfortunately, you're not really taking new patients at this point, but we will look for, you know, there's going to be just more people like you are going to be in demand. So, like we're going to have to train more people on
Mhm.
all of these things, but tell us where we can find and follow you and what's coming up in the future for you.
So I have a school group that I
Oh,
run with another practitioner, and
that's
we
right. You
teach
just opened
about
that, right?
yeah, we teach about all these things
Okay.
weekly. And then so we're building sort of a database of talks and resources for people who are really interested in learning about circadian health, metabolism, mitochondrial health. We dive into a lot of things there. And that's pretty accessible overall. And you can talk to me directly there, right? Because I engage that group a whole lot. And then, like I said, I am building a decentralized practice that is very close to opening. I'm going to, the limitation is always, when you're an MD and you operate under a licensure that's state specific. So I can only see patients in a doctor-patient relationship capacity in Tennessee as of now because that's where I hold my license. But I am going to be available for coaching, education, in other avenues. And then if I have enough patients in a specific state that are interested in having me as their provider, then I'll probably get licensed in more states later. But yeah, that's how it's going to go for now. And I'm just kind of seeing how it all unfolds. But I'm really, really excited about the future of medicine. So.
Yes. I
Mhm.
know. It's like we have something to get excited about again. Like
Mhm.
it's been just like so doomy, gloomy for a while. And now it's like it gets exciting again. So where can we find you? Do you have a website or where
Well, probably the easiest place is Instagram,
okay.
Kelsey Dexter, MD. I have a website that is under construction, so it won't be useful to look for me there, but I'll have that eventually with all my resources attached. Yeah.
It's a lot to build. I've been
Yeah.
at it for 5 years and I'm now revamping my website for the third time. So it's just there's always something. But I love what you're doing. You're changing people's lives. You're treating metabolic health in such a different way, and it's so refreshing and looking to treat without medications rather than building medications. So
Mhm.
it's very profound. And I'm so glad that I found you and your work and that you shared all your knowledge today with us.
Well, thank you. And I'm really, really appreciative of this connection too. And I have to tell you that um, it's actually a little bit difficult for me to find nutritionists
Oh, yeah.
and that are aligned in
Right.
this way. So hopefully we can collaborate some with patients. Sure.
Oh, for sure. I know it's weird when you're on your own little bubble of people who are like-minded, you think everybody kind of thinks like we do, but then you're like,
Mhm.
oh, nope. Nope, we have a long way to go. So
Yes.
feelings mutual. It was delightful to have you here today.
Thank you so much.